The scream came before the sun rose. Elira sat up in the narrow servant bed, heart pounding, certain someone had been dragged from the hallway outside her door. But when she opened it, there was only silence, and the cold stone floor, and the faint smell of smoke from the kitchen fires being lit 2 floors below. She told herself it was a dream. She told herself that every morning in the palace of Alpha King Ronan Voss began this way, with fear stitched into the walls, because fear was the currency this territory traded in since the king had taken the throne 5 years ago, hard and unsmiling and untouchable. She dressed quickly in her gray servant dress, tied her dark hair back, and made her way down to the laundry hall where she worked, folding linens that smelled of lavender and bleach, listening to the other girls whisper about the king's temper, about the noble who had been sent away in chains last week, about how no one dared look him directly in the eyes anymore. Elira never joined these conversations. She kept her head down and her hands busy, because she had learned long ago that a quiet girl was a safe girl, and safety was the only luxury an orphan like her could afford. She hummed while she worked. She always hummed while she worked. It was a small private habit, a melody she had known for as long as she could remember, one that rose in her chest, without her permission, whenever her hands were busy and her mind was free. She did not know where the tune came from. She did not know it had words, not really, only a shape, a rise and fall like the rocking of a cradle, gentle and aching all at once. She had asked Mother Agath once, years ago, back at the orphanage in the lower village, where the song had come from, and the old woman had only smiled sadly and said, "It belongs to you, child, the way your eyes belong to you," and left it at that. So Elira hummed it now, low under her breath, threading it through the rhythm of folding sheets, unaware that 2 floors above her, in the west wing of the palace, a window had been left open, and the morning air was carrying her voice up through the stone corridors, like smoke finding its way to the sky. Ronan Voss was standing at his window when the sound reached him. He had not slept. He rarely slept anymore. Not fully. Not the way a man was supposed to sleep, because sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant his mother's face, and his mother's face meant that 12 years since her death had done nothing to dull the wound that lived beneath his ribs. He was staring out at the training yard, at the pack soldiers running drills in the gray dawn light, thinking of nothing, thinking of everything, when the melody drifted in through the open window and stopped him cold. His hand, resting on the stone sill, tightened until his knuckles went pale. It was impossible. It was simply impossible, and yet his ears did not lie to him. His ears had never lied to him, not once in his life, and what they were telling him now was that somewhere in this palace, someone was humming his mother's lullaby, the one she used to sing to him when he was small, before the world had taught him what a crown truly cost. The one no one else had ever known, because she had told him, in her soft voice, on the last night he ever saw her alive, that this song was theirs, and theirs alone, a secret between a mother and her son, not to be written down, not to be taught to another living soul. He had believed her. He had held that belief close for 12 long years, a single warm ember in the cold place where his heart used to be. And now, it was drifting through his window on the morning air. He moved before he had decided to move. He was down the corridor, past the startled guards who straightened against the walls as he passed, down the spiral stairs that led toward the servants' quarters, a place the king of this territory had not set foot in for years, because there was no need, because kings did not walk among linens and laundry baskets. But Ronan was walking there now, fast, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with something that had not stirred in him for a very long time, hope, or maybe fear. He could not tell the difference anymore. The laundry hall was warm and smelled of soap. 6 girls looked up in shock as the door slammed open, and the Alpha King himself stood in the frame, broad-shouldered and dark-eyed, his presence swallowing all the air in the room. Every girl dropped into a bow so fast that one of them knocked over a basket of folded towels. Except one. Elira had not seen him yet. Her back was turned, her hands still moving over a sheet, and the melody was still rising softly from her lips, unaware, unafraid, because she did not yet know that the ground beneath her had just shifted forever. "Who is singing?" Ronan said, and his voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade through silk. The humming stopped instantly. Elira turned, and when she saw him, the king, standing there, filling the doorway with a stillness more frightening than any shout, she felt the blood drain from her face. She dropped into a bow so deep her knees nearly touched the floor. "Forgive me, Your Highness," she said, her voice shaking. "I did not mean to disturb the halls." Ronan crossed the room in 4 long strides and stopped in front of her. Up close, she was smaller than he expected. Her eyes a strange pale gray, her face pinched with fear, and yet there was something in her expression, something familiar, though he could not place it, that made the ember in his chest burn hotter. "The song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" Illyra blinked. Her mind raced, trying to understand what she had done wrong, whether humming was forbidden, whether she had broken some rule she had never been told existed. "I am sorry, my lord. I did not know it was against the rules to sing while I worked. I will not do it again." "That is not what I asked you," Ronan said, and though his voice remained level, something dangerous moved beneath it, like a river under thin ice. "I asked where you learned that song." The other girls in the room stood frozen, eyes darting between their king and their trembling co-worker, none of them daring to move, none of them daring to breathe too loudly. The air had grown so tight it felt as though the whole room had been sealed inside glass. "I have known it since I was a child," Illyra said carefully, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. "I grew up in an orphanage in the lower village. The woman who raised me, Mother Agath, she never told me where it came from. I only know it as something I have always carried with me." Ronan studied her face for a long moment, searching for a lie, searching for deception, searching, if he was honest with himself, for a reason to dismiss this entirely as coincidence. Some folk tune passed through the villages that simply happened to resemble his mother's song, but the shape of it had been exact. Every note, every pause, every place where the melody dipped low, and then lifted again, like a held breath released. It was not similar. It was the same. "Bring her to the throne room," he said, turning toward the door. "Now." A ripple of shock went through the laundry hall. Illyra's stomach dropped through the floor. Being summoned to the throne room was not something that happened to servant girls, not for anything good. It was where punishments were handed down, where the accused stood trembling before judgment, where more than one person had vanished from the palace after being led through those tall doors. "Your Highness, please," she said, her voice breaking. "If I have offended you, I will accept whatever punishment you see fit, but I beg you, tell me what I have done." Ronan paused in the doorway and looked back at her, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across his hardened face, something that was not anger at all, but a rawness so deep it startled even him. "You have done nothing wrong," he said quietly. "That is what frightens me." He left without another word, and 2 guards stepped forward to escort her, their expressions unreadable, and Illyra followed them on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, her mind spinning, her heart hammering, the melody still echoing faintly in her ears, though she no longer understood why a simple lullaby could summon a king from his own chambers, or why the look in his eyes had been less like fury and more like grief wearing the mask of a ruler who had forgotten how to show anything else. As they walked the long corridor toward the throne room, Illyra caught her reflection in a tall, gilded mirror hung along the wall, and for just a second, she did not recognize the pale, frightened girl staring back at her. She thought of Mother Agath, of the orphanage, of the locket she still kept hidden beneath her mattress, the one piece of her past no one had ever been able to explain. She thought of the countless nights she had hummed that same tune to herself, when the world felt too large and too cold, never once imagining that the melody carried a weight far heavier than comfort. She did not know, as she walked those final steps toward the throne room doors, that she was about to become the center of a secret 12 years buried, a secret that had cost a queen her life and a son his peace, and that the innocent song she had carried since childhood was not a coincidence at all, but a thread, the last thread, of a truth someone in this very palace had worked very hard to keep hidden forever. The great doors opened before her, and beyond them, seated upon his throne, with his hands gripping the armrests, as though bracing for an impact only he could see coming, the Alpha King waited, his dark eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made the breath catch in her throat. Whatever was about to happen, Illyra understood in that moment. Her old life, the quiet, invisible life she had built for herself out of careful silence and lowered eyes, was already over. The doors closed behind her with a heavy, final sound, sealing her inside a room where the truth, long buried and long denied, was finally beginning to stir awake. The throne room was colder than Illyra expected, though perhaps it was only her own fear making the air feel that way. Tall windows lined the walls, letting in thin morning light that did nothing to soften the sharp edges of the stone pillars, or the heavy silence pressing down from the ceiling. She stood at the center of the floor, alone, while the guards who had escorted her retreated to the far corners of the room, leaving her exposed beneath the gaze of the man seated above her. Ronan did not speak right away. He sat with his elbows on the armrests of his throne, his fingers laced together beneath his chin, studying her the way a man studies a puzzle he has been trying to solve for years, and has finally, unexpectedly, found a missing piece to. Elira kept her eyes lowered, as she had been trained to do since childhood, though every part of her wanted to look up and understand what was happening to her. "Tell me your name," he said at last. "Elira, your highness. Elira Vane." "Vane," he repeated softly, as though testing the sound of it, searching his memory for any thread that might connect to it. "Is that your family name, or one given to you at the orphanage?" "Given to me, my lord. I do not know my true family. I was left at the orphanage as an infant, with nothing but a blanket and a locket. Mother Agath told me my parents likely could not care for me, or perhaps did not survive to raise me. I never learned more than that." Something shifted in Ronan's expression at the mention of the locket, a flicker so quick that Elira almost missed it. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes narrowing. "A locket," he said. "Do you still have it?" "Yes, my lord. I have kept it since I was a child. I do not go anywhere without knowing where it is." "Bring it to me," he said. "Tomorrow, at first light. Do not show it to anyone else. Do not speak of it to anyone else. Do you understand me?" Elira nodded quickly, though confusion tightened around her chest, like a rope pulled slowly taut. "Yes, your highness. I understand." Ronan sat back again, and for a long moment he simply looked at her, his jaw working as though he were chewing on words he could not decide whether to release. Finally he spoke, and his voice, though still low, carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. 12 years ago, my mother died," he said. "Or so I was told. She vanished in the night, and 3 days later, word came that her body had been found beyond the northern border, too damaged by the elements to be recognized, but wearing her ring, which was enough for the council to declare her dead and move forward with my crowning. I was young. I trusted what I was told, because grief does not leave much room for questions. But she used to sing me a song, one she said belonged only to the two of us, one she swore she had never taught to another living soul. It was the exact song you were humming this morning." Elira felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "My lord, I swear to you, I never knew, I never intended anything by it." "I am not accusing you of anything," Ronan said, cutting through her panic with unexpected gentleness. "I am telling you, because I need you to understand why I cannot simply let this go. Either there is an explanation I have not yet found, some coincidence too strange to make sense of, or everything I was told about my mother's death was a lie, built to keep me from asking the wrong questions of the wrong people." Elira's mind raced back through every memory she had of the orphanage, every fragment of her earliest years, searching desperately for anything that might explain how a song sung only between a queen and her son had somehow found its way into the mouth of an orphan girl, with no family, and no history worth speaking of. She found nothing solid, only the same soft, unanswerable memory of Mother Agath humming her to sleep with that very tune, long before Elira was old enough to question where such comfort had come from. "I do not understand how this is possible," she said quietly. "I have asked myself the same question my whole life. Why I know a song no one around me ever seemed to recognize. Why the other children at the orphanage always looked at me strangely when I hummed it, as though it did not belong to our world." Ronan rose from his throne and descended the steps slowly, his boots echoing against the marble floor until he stood only a few feet from her, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy for far too long, without ever setting it down. "I intend to find out the truth," he said, "and you, Elira Vane, whether you understand it yet or not, are now part of that truth. I will have my men look into the orphanage records, into Mother Agath, into anyone who might know how you came to be left there. You will remain in the palace under my protection, until I understand what any of this means." "Under your protection," Elira repeated, unsure whether to feel relieved or more frightened than before. "Forgive me, my lord, but does that mean I am a prisoner?" "It means," Ronan said, his voice quieter now, "that I do not yet know who around me can be trusted, and until I do, I would rather keep you somewhere I can see you than somewhere someone else might reach you first." The weight of that statement settled over her slowly, and though she did not fully grasp its meaning, a small cold seed of understanding began to grow in her chest, the sense that she had stumbled, without ever meaning to, into something far larger and far more dangerous than a servant girl was ever meant to touch. She thought of her quiet life in the laundry hall, of the friends she had slowly made among the other girls, of the simple, invisible existence she had built for herself brick by careful brick, and she understood, with a sinking heart, that all of it was about to change. Ronan turned to the guards stationed at the edges of the room. "Move her belongings to the east wing," he said. "Give her a room near mine, one with a guard posted at all times, for her safety and for mine. No one is to know the reason. If anyone asks, she has been assigned as a personal attendant." The guards bowed and moved to obey without question, though Elira caught the curious glances they exchanged with one another as they passed, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. She stood frozen at the center of the throne room, overwhelmed, uncertain whether the ground beneath her had become more solid or infinitely less so. "Your Highness," she said softly, before he could turn away. "May I ask you something?" He paused, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "Ask. If this song truly belonged to your mother, and to you, then why does hearing it from me not simply anger you as an intrusion? Why does it seem instead to give you something like hope?" For a long moment, Ronan said nothing at all. The muscles along his jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped so low it was almost lost beneath the sound of the wind pressing against the tall windows. "Because for 12 years, I believed my mother's voice had disappeared from this world entirely," he said, "and this morning, for the first time since her death, I heard it again." He left the throne room without another word, his cloak sweeping behind him, and Elira stood alone beneath the tall windows, the weight of his final sentence settling over her like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through every certainty she had ever held about her own quiet, unremarkable life. Whatever answers waited ahead of her, she understood now that there was no returning to the girl she had been that morning, humming softly over folded linens, unaware that her voice alone had been enough to shake the foundations of a kingdom built on a lie. Elira did not sleep that night. She lay in the unfamiliar bed in the east wing, a room far grander than anything she had ever known, with a fire crackling low in the hearth and a guard posted silently outside her door, and she stared at the ceiling while her mind turned over every word the king had spoken. She thought of the locket beneath her old mattress in the servants' quarters, now carried carefully to this new room, and placed on the small table beside her bed, and she reached for it in the darkness, running her thumb over its worn silver surface the way she had done 1,000 times since childhood, searching, as she always did, for some meaning hidden in its shape. By morning her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she rose anyway, dressed in the plain gray gown that had been left for her, and waited, clutching the locket tightly in her palm, until a guard arrived to escort her to the king's private study. The study was smaller than the throne room, warmer, lined with tall shelves of old books and maps, and Ronan stood near the window when she entered, his back to her, his shoulders tense beneath his dark coat. He turned as the door closed, and his eyes went immediately to her hand. "You brought it," he said. "Yes, my lord." She stepped forward and held the locket out to him, her fingers trembling slightly as she did. He took it carefully, almost reverently, and turned it over in his palm, before pressing the small catch on its side. It opened with a soft click, revealing nothing inside but a faint engraving on the inner surface, a symbol Elira had looked at countless times without ever understanding its meaning. 2 crescent shapes curved around a small central star. Ronan went very still. "My lord," she said carefully, "does it mean something to you?" He did not answer right away. He crossed to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a folded piece of parchment, old and yellowed at the edges, which he laid flat beside the locket. On the parchment was a wax seal, cracked with age, bearing the exact same symbol, 2 crescents curved around a star. "This is my mother's personal seal," he said quietly. "She used it only for private letters, correspondence she did not want passing through the official channels of the court. I have not seen this symbol anywhere outside her own hand in 12 years. Elira stared at the parchment and the locket side by side, the identical marks staring back at her like twin eyes, and felt something cold settle deep in her stomach. "I do not understand how I came to carry something with her seal on it," she said. "I was only an infant when I was left at the orphanage. Which means, Ronan said, his voice tightening, that whoever left you there knew my mother, or was connected to her closely enough to carry something bearing her personal mark. This was not chosen by accident, Illyra. Someone placed this locket with you deliberately, as though they wanted you to be found again one day, by someone who would recognize it. The weight of his words pressed down on her slowly, each one settling into place like a stone added to a wall being built around her old understanding of herself. She thought again of Mother Agath, of the gentle, tired woman who had raised her without ever explaining where she had truly come from, and a new question rose in her chest, sharp and urgent. "My lord," she said, "is it possible that Mother Agath knew something about this? About your mother?" Ronan's eyes lifted to meet hers, and in them she saw the same flicker of desperate hope she had seen the morning before, mixed now with something colder and more determined. "That is precisely what I intend to find out," he said. "I have already sent riders to the lower village to bring her here for questioning. If she is still alive, she will answer for whatever role she has played in this." Illyra's breath caught. "Please, my lord, if she comes, treat her gently. She was kind to me. Whatever secrets she may be holding, I do not believe she meant harm by keeping them." Ronan studied her for a long moment, something in his expression softening slightly at the plea in her voice, though the hardness beneath it did not fully disappear. "I will hear what she has to say before I judge her," he said. "That is the most I can promise you." It was not until later that afternoon that a servant arrived at the study door with urgent news, his face pale, his breathing quick from having run through the corridors. "Your Highness," he said, bowing hastily, "the riders have returned from the lower village. They say the orphanage burned 3 nights ago. Nothing remains but ash, and Mother Agath cannot be found anywhere among the survivors." The room went utterly silent. Illyra felt the blood drain from her face as the words settled over her, and beside her, she saw Ronan's expression shift into something sharp and dangerous, the look of a man who had just watched a crucial piece of evidence vanish into smoke before he could reach it. 3 nights ago, Ronan repeated slowly. "The same night before Illyra began humming that song in my laundry hall." Illyra's mind reeled, trying to make sense of the timing, trying to understand what it could mean that the one place holding the answers to her past had burned to the ground, just as her presence in the palace began drawing the king's attention. A terrible thought crept into her mind, one she did not want to voice aloud, but which she could no longer ignore. "Someone did not want the truth found," she said quietly. Ronan turned to the servant still waiting in the doorway. "Find out everything you can about how the fire started," he ordered. "Question anyone who lived near the orphanage. I want to know if this was truly an accident, or if someone worked very hard to make certain it looked like one." The servant bowed quickly and hurried away, and Ronan turned back to Illyra, his expression grim. "It seems," he said, "that whoever hid you away 12 years ago is not the only person interested in keeping your past buried. Someone else wants it to stay that way just as badly, and they are willing to burn down an entire building full of innocent children to make certain of it." Illyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth beside them. "Then Mother Agath," she began, her voice trembling. "Do you think she is—" "I do not know," Ronan said honestly, his voice gentler than she expected. "But I promise you this. Whoever is responsible for that fire will be found, and they will answer for it, along with every other secret they have tried to bury alongside my mother's name." He reached out then, an unexpected gesture, and closed her fingers gently back around the locket resting in her palm. His touch brief but steady. "Keep this close," he said. "It may be the only thread left connecting us to the truth, and I do not intend to lose it the way I lost everything else that mattered to me 12 years ago." Illyra nodded, though her heart was pounding with a fear she could not fully name, a fear that reached far beyond her own uncertain past, and into something larger, something that had already claimed an orphanage full of children, and was clearly willing to claim more, before it was finished protecting whatever secret it had been built to guard. 3 days passed before any real news arrived, and in that time, Illyra found herself drawn slowly into a strange new rhythm of life within the palace walls, one where guards watched her constantly, where servants whispered behind their hands whenever she passed, and where the king himself began appearing at odd hours to ask her small, careful questions about her childhood, searching for any detail that might unlock the mystery neither of them could yet solve. She was in the palace library, reading quietly by a tall window, when Ronan finally brought her the news she had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "We found survivors," he said, closing the door behind him. Two of the older children managed to escape the fire before the roof collapsed. They are being cared for in the village now, and one of them remembers something important. Elira set down her book and rose quickly. What did they say? A boy, perhaps 12 years old, told my men that on the night of the fire, he saw a stranger near the orphanage earlier that evening. A man he did not recognize, dressed in dark travel clothes, speaking quietly with Mother Agath near the garden gate. He said the conversation looked tense, almost like an argument, though he could not hear the words clearly enough to understand what was said. A stranger, Elira repeated, her mind racing. Did the boy see his face? Only briefly, from a distance. He described him as tall, with a scar along one side of his jaw, and said the man wore a ring on his right hand, silver, shaped like a wolf's head. My men are searching the records now to see if that description matches anyone known to the court. Elira sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of new information after days of frustrating silence. Do you believe this man started the fire? I believe it is far too convenient a coincidence for him not to be connected somehow, Ronan said, pacing slowly before the window. If Mother Agath was arguing with someone the very night the orphanage burned and she disappeared, then either she was warned of danger and fled before the flames began, or she was silenced before she could reveal whatever it was she knew. The thought that Mother Agath might still be alive somewhere, hiding, frightened but safe, sent a fragile hope fluttering through Elira's chest, though she forced herself not to hold on to it too tightly, aware of how easily hope could be crushed in a story already so full of loss. There is something else, Ronan continued, his voice quieter now, more careful. My mother had a personal guard, a man named Callan Wraith, who served her loyally for years before her disappearance. He vanished from the court records not long after her death was announced, and no one has been able to explain where he went or why he left so suddenly. I always assumed he simply could not bear to remain in a place that reminded him of her. Now I am beginning to wonder if there was another reason entirely. Do you think this Callan Wraith could be the man the boy described? Elira asked. It is possible, Ronan said, though it has been 12 years, and memory fades, and descriptions from frightened children are rarely perfectly reliable. Still, it gives us a direction to search, which is more than we had a week ago. Elira stood and walked slowly toward the window, looking out over the palace grounds where soldiers trained in neat, disciplined rows, unaware of the quiet storm gathering above their heads within these walls. My lord, she said after a moment, may I ask you something that has been troubling me since the night you first summoned me? Ask, he said. If your mother truly loved you as deeply as this lullaby suggests, why would she leave you at all? Why would she vanish into hiding, if that is truly what happened, and allow you to grow up believing she was dead, believing you had lost her forever, when clearly the pain of that loss has never left you? Ronan's expression tightened, and for a moment, Elira feared she had overstepped, asked something too personal, too raw for a servant girl to speak aloud to her king. But instead of anger, what crossed his face was something closer to old, familiar grief. I do not yet know the full answer to that question, he admitted quietly, but I have begun to suspect that whatever happened 12 years ago was not a choice she made freely. If she is somehow connected to you, if she entrusted you to Mother Agath before her disappearance, then perhaps she was not running from me at all. Perhaps she was running to protect me and simply never found a way back. The idea settled heavily over both of them, and for a long moment neither spoke, each lost in thoughts too large and too fragile to voice aloud. Finally, Ronan turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. There is one more possibility I have not yet said aloud, he continued, his voice low. What if you are not simply connected to my mother through circumstance, but through blood? What if the reason you carry her seal, and her song, is because you are family, hidden away for your own protection, just as she may have been hidden herself? Elira felt the room tilt slightly beneath her, the idea almost too large to hold inside her chest. Family, she whispered. My lord, if that were true, what would it mean for me? For you? It would mean, Ronan said quietly, that neither of us is quite as alone in this world as we believed ourselves to be. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous, carrying within them the promise of connection and the threat of a truth that could unravel everything the kingdom believed about its own history. Outside the window, the soldiers continued their drills, unaware that above them, in a quiet library filled with old books and older secrets, the foundations of their world had just begun to shift, one careful, uncertain word at a time. That night, Illyra dreamed of a room she had never seen before, small and dim, lit only by a single candle, with a woman's voice humming softly nearby. In the dream, she was very young, small enough to be held, and warm arms rocked her gently, while the familiar melody filled the air around them. She could not see the woman's face clearly, only the soft fall of dark hair, and the faint outline of a delicate hand resting against her back. But she felt, with a certainty that had no logical explanation, that she was safe, that she was loved, that this moment mattered more than any other moment in her short life. She woke with tears on her cheeks, and her heart pounding, the melody still echoing faintly in her ears, as though the dream had not fully released her yet. She told Ronan about it the next morning, sitting across from him at the small table in his study, where they had begun taking their meals together, a habit that had formed quietly over the past several days, without either of them quite deciding to start it. A candle, and a small room, he repeated thoughtfully. Do you remember anything else? Any details about the walls, the furniture, anything at all? There was a curtain, Illyra said, closing her eyes as she tried to recall the fading fragments. Blue, I think, or perhaps gray, hanging over a narrow window, and there was a sound outside, water, like a stream running nearby. Ronan's expression sharpened with sudden recognition. There is a cottage, he said slowly, along the eastern border of the territory, near the old stream crossing, that belonged to my mother's personal attendant. It was abandoned after her death, left to sit empty because no one had reason to visit it. If she was truly hiding, if she needed somewhere quiet and remote to keep a child safe, that cottage would have been the perfect place. Do you think that is where the dream comes from? Illyra asked. Do you think it is a memory, not simply a dream? I think, Ronan said carefully, that it is worth riding out to see for ourselves. They left within the hour, accompanied by 4 guards whom Ronan trusted more than any others in the palace, riding hard toward the eastern border as the morning sun climbed higher above the tree line. Illyra had never ridden so far from the palace before, and despite the tension coiled tightly in her chest, she found herself momentarily distracted by the beauty of the land unfolding around them, rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, dense forests giving way to open fields, all of it so far removed from the narrow, controlled world she had known within the palace walls. The cottage, when they finally reached it, was smaller than Illyra had imagined, half swallowed by ivy and years of neglect, its wooden shutters hanging loosely from rusted hinges. Ronan dismounted first, his hand resting instinctively near the hilt of his sword as he approached the door, though nothing about the quiet, overgrown clearing suggested any immediate danger. Inside, dust coated every surface, and cobwebs stretched between the rafters, but as Illyra stepped through the doorway behind him, a strange, powerful sense of familiarity washed over her, so strong it nearly stole the breath from her lungs. This place, she whispered. My lord, I have been here before. I am certain of it. She moved slowly through the small main room, her fingers trailing over a dust-covered table, and then toward a narrow doorway leading to a smaller room beyond it, the exact room from her dream, she realized with a chill, the faded blue curtain still hanging crookedly over the narrow window, though moths had long since eaten through its fabric. Ronan followed her inside, watching closely as she knelt beside an old wooden chest tucked into the corner of the room, its surface warped from years of dampness. Without quite understanding why, she reached out and pressed her palm against its lid, and something inside her, some old, buried instinct, guided her fingers to a small hidden latch along its side that she should have had no way of knowing existed. The chest opened with a groan of protest, revealing a collection of old letters tied together with faded ribbon, a woman's shawl folded carefully atop them, and, resting beneath everything else, a small portrait, painted in miniature, of a woman with dark hair and pale gray eyes, holding an infant wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Ronan went utterly still beside her. That is my mother, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That is Queen Leora. Illyra stared down at the portrait, at the woman's face so achingly familiar despite never having consciously seen it before, and then at the infant, cradled gently in her arms, and felt the last fragile wall of denial inside her crumble away entirely. And the child, Illyra said softly. though she already knew the answer before Ronan spoke it aloud. Ronan lifted his eyes from the portrait to meet hers, and in them she saw a storm of emotions colliding at once, disbelief, and grief, and something that looked almost like relief, breaking through years of hardened control. "I do not believe that is me in that portrait," he said quietly. "I believe, Elira, that the child in my mother's arms is you." The words settled over the small, dust-filled room, like a held breath finally released, and outside the narrow window, the stream continued its quiet, endless rush toward the sea, indifferent to the truth that had just been unearthed within these forgotten walls, a truth that would soon ripple outward through the entire kingdom, touching lives far beyond the quiet cottage, where it had been buried for 12 long years. They sat together on the floor of the cottage for a long while. After that, the old letters spread carefully between them, both too stunned to speak much at first. Ronan untied the faded ribbon with careful hands, and one by one, they began reading through the pages, written in a graceful, familiar hand that Ronan recognized instantly as his mother's own. The letters were addressed to no one, written instead as though Leora had simply needed somewhere to place her thoughts, fragments of fear and love tangled together across the fading ink. She wrote of a danger closing in around the palace, of council members she no longer trusted, of a plot forming against her that she could feel but could not yet prove. She wrote of a daughter, born quietly, kept secret from all but a few trusted souls, because she feared what certain members of the court might do if they learned a second child existed, one who might one day challenge the line of succession she had worked so hard to secure for her son. "I could not risk her safety," one letter read, "nor could I risk the stability I have built for Ronan. So I have made the hardest choice a mother can make. I have given my daughter into loving hands, far from the palace, far from the danger circling closer each day. I pray that one day, when it is safe, I will find my way back to her. I pray Ronan will forgive me, if he ever learns the truth, for the years I could not explain." Elira's hands trembled as she held the page, the weight of the words settling deep into her chest. "I am her daughter," she said softly, testing the truth of the sentence as though speaking it aloud might make it more real. "Your sister." Ronan reached over and gently took her hand, an unfamiliar gesture between them, though it felt, in that moment, entirely natural. "It seems so," he said, his voice thick with emotion he was clearly struggling to contain. "All these years, I mourned as though I had lost everyone who mattered to me. I never imagined I still had family left in this world, hidden away, waiting to be found." The final letter in the small bundle was dated only weeks before Leora's disappearance, and its tone had shifted, sharper now, more urgent. She wrote of a specific threat, a name she dared not commit fully to paper, only referring to the danger as someone close to the throne, someone with access to her private chambers, someone she had once trusted completely, before discovering the depth of their betrayal. The letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as though she had been interrupted before finishing her thought, and had never returned to complete it. "Someone close to the throne," Ronan repeated grimly, staring down at the unfinished words. "That narrows very little, and yet it confirms what I have feared since this began. Whoever orchestrated her disappearance 12 years ago is very likely still within these palace walls today, still trusted, still powerful, still capable of silencing anyone who threatens to expose them." Elira felt a fresh wave of fear settle over her, sharper now that she understood what was truly at stake, not just her own uncertain past, but her life, and Ronan's, and the fragile peace of an entire kingdom, built atop a lie someone had worked very hard, and very ruthlessly, to protect. "We should return to the palace," Ronan said finally, gathering the letters carefully and tucking them into his coat. "It is not safe to remain out here longer than necessary, and I do not wish to leave the palace unwatched, while whoever is responsible for this remains free to act." As they rode back beneath the lengthening afternoon shadows, Elira found herself studying Ronan's profile in a new light, searching for traces of the brother she had just discovered she possessed, the shape of his jaw, the color of his eyes, details she had not thought to notice before but which now seemed suddenly, achingly familiar, echoes of the portrait they had found hidden in that dusty chest. "My lord," she said quietly as they rode, "now that we know the truth, what happens next?" Ronan glanced over at her, his expression a complicated mixture of protectiveness and determination. "Now," he said, "we find out who took our mother from us. and we make certain they never have the chance to hurt this family again." The words carried a weight that settled over both of them as the palace came into view ahead, its tall towers catching the last golden light of the afternoon sun, beautiful and imposing, and, Elira now understood with a chill, harboring somewhere within its walls the very danger that had shattered her family 12 years before she had ever known she possessed one at all. Whatever safety she had imagined finding within those walls now felt fragile and uncertain, because the enemy they hunted was not some distant threat beyond the borders of the kingdom, but someone close enough to have once shared a table, a conversation, perhaps even a friendship, with the very family they had sworn, 12 years ago, to destroy. Word of Elira's changed status within the palace spread quickly once they returned, despite Ronan's efforts to keep the matter contained. Servants whispered in corners, and members of the court began casting curious, calculating glances her way whenever she passed through the hallways, no longer dressed in her plain gray servant's gown, but in the finer clothing Ronan had insisted she wear. A quiet declaration that her place in the palace had shifted, even before any formal announcement had been made. Not everyone welcomed the change. Lord Caspian Thorne, a senior member of the ruling council who had served under Ronan since the beginning of his reign, requested a private audience with the king, only 2 days after their return from the cottage, his expression carefully composed but his eyes sharp with poorly hidden concern. "Your Highness," he began, once the study door had closed behind him, "forgive my bluntness, but the entire court is speaking of little else. A servant girl, elevated suddenly to a place of honor, rumored now to be some manner of hidden relation to the late queen. Surely you understand how such claims, unverified, could destabilize the confidence the nobility places in your judgment." Ronan regarded the older man with a level, unreadable expression. "The claims are not unverified, Lord Thorne," he said evenly. "I have seen evidence with my own eyes, evidence that satisfies me completely of her identity." "Evidence can be forged," Caspian pressed carefully. "Your Highness, I say this only out of loyalty to the crown. There are those who might seek to use a girl of uncertain origin to work their way closer to the throne, to influence you during a vulnerable moment, to destabilize the succession you have worked so hard to secure. I do not say this is her intention. I say only that caution would serve you well." Elira, standing quietly near the window where she had been reading when Lord Thorne arrived, felt the weight of his words settle uncomfortably over her, aware suddenly of how precarious her position truly was, not simply within her own uncertain heart, but within the delicate political machinery of a kingdom she barely understood. "I appreciate your caution, Lord Thorne," Ronan said finally, his tone leaving no room for further argument. "But my decision stands. Elira remains under my protection, and I would advise anyone within this court who wishes to question that decision to bring their concerns directly to me, rather than allowing rumor to do their speaking for them." Caspian bowed stiffly, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly, before he composed himself once more. "Of course, Your Highness. I only wish to see the kingdom remain stable." "As always," Ronan replied, and after Caspian departed, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Elira crossed slowly toward Ronan's desk once the door had closed. "Do you trust him?" she asked quietly. Ronan considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I have trusted him for 5 years," he said. "He has served the council loyally, or so I believed. But after everything we found in that cottage, I find myself questioning every face I once considered safe." That evening, while walking alone through the palace gardens to clear her thoughts, Elira noticed a figure moving quickly along the far edge of the stone wall, bordering the eastern courtyard, slipping through a narrow servants' gate that led toward the stables. Something about the careful, hurried way the figure moved caught her attention, and against her better judgment, she followed at a cautious distance, staying low behind the hedges lining the garden path. She recognized the figure only when he paused beneath a lantern near the stable entrance, to speak quietly, with a second man waiting in the shadows, a stranger, dressed in dark travel clothes, his face partially obscured, though the faint silver glint of a ring on his right hand caught the lantern light as he gestured sharply during their hushed exchange. A ring shaped, unmistakably, like a wolf's head. Elira's breath caught in her throat. The description matched exactly what the surviving orphan boy had described, the same stranger seen near the orphanage on the night of the fire. The first figure, the one who had led her here, turned slightly as he spoke, and the lantern light finally illuminated his face clearly enough for her to recognize him. It was Lord Caspian Thorn. Elira pressed herself deeper into the shadow of the hedges, her heart hammering violently against her ribs, straining to catch fragments of their conversation carried faintly on the evening breeze. She still doesn't remember anything useful. Caspian's voice drifted toward her, tight with barely controlled frustration. But the king grows more suspicious by the day. If she recalls anything more from that cottage, or if anyone connects me to what happened 12 years ago, everything we have built collapses. Then perhaps, the stranger replied, his voice low and rough, it is time to finish what should have been finished at the orphanage. Elira's blood ran cold. She turned and fled back through the gardens as quietly as her trembling legs would allow, her mind racing, understanding now with terrible clarity that the danger threatening her family was not some distant, faceless enemy, but a man who sat regularly at the king's own council table, trusted, respected, and utterly ruthless in his determination to keep a 12-year-old secret buried, no matter the cost. She had to find Ronan. She had to tell him everything, before Lord Caspian Thorn and his hidden accomplice found the chance to silence her, the same way they had silenced an entire orphanage full of innocent children. Elira burst into Ronan's study, without waiting to be announced, startling the 2 guards stationed outside, who moved quickly to stop her, before Ronan waved them back with a sharp gesture, rising immediately from his desk at the sight of her pale, frightened face. "What happened?" he asked, crossing the room to her in a few quick strides. "I saw him," she said breathlessly, the words tumbling out faster than she could properly order them. "Lord Thorn, in the gardens, speaking with a man wearing a wolf ring, the same ring the boy from the orphanage described. My lord, I heard them. They spoke of finishing what they started at the orphanage. They spoke of keeping secrets buried, secrets from 12 years ago." Ronan's expression shifted instantly, the careful composure he wore in front of the court falling away entirely, replaced by something harder, colder, more dangerous. "Are you certain it was Thorn?" he asked. "Certain beyond any doubt?" "Completely certain," Elira said. "I saw his face clearly beneath the lantern light. There is no mistake." Ronan turned away from her, pacing toward the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, as years of buried grief and suspicion finally found a solid target to fix themselves upon. "Thorn has sat at my council table for 5 years, he said, his voice tight with barely restrained fury. "He advised my mother before that. He was there the week she disappeared. I trusted him completely, and he has been lying to my face since the very beginning." "We need proof," Elira said carefully, her mind racing to catch up with the danger unfolding around them. "Something beyond what I overheard, something that will hold against him in front of the full council, or he will simply deny everything and turn the court's suspicion back onto us." Ronan nodded slowly, forcing himself to think clearly despite the anger clearly burning beneath his controlled exterior. "You are right," he said. "If we move against him without solid proof, he will claim we invented the accusation, to distract from questions about your own legitimacy. We need something undeniable." That night, under cover of darkness, Ronan called together the small handful of guards he trusted absolutely, men who had served him personally since before his coronation, and explained the situation in careful, measured terms. They agreed to watch Lord Thorn's private chambers and correspondence, discreetly, searching for any written evidence that might connect him directly to Queen Leora's disappearance 12 years earlier, or to the fire that had destroyed the orphanage only days before. 2 days passed in tense, careful silence, during which Elira barely left Ronan's side, both of them acutely aware that Lord Thorn, if he suspected they were closing in on him, would not hesitate to act again, more violently and more decisively than before. On the 3rd night, one of Ronan's trusted guards returned with a small locked box discovered hidden behind a false panel in Lord Thorn's private study, along with several letters bearing the unmistakable handwriting of Callan Wraith, the vanished royal guard Ronan had suspected earlier of involvement in his mother's disappearance. The letters, once opened and read carefully by lantern light in Ronan's private study, revealed a conspiracy far deeper and more calculated than either of them had anticipated. Lord Thorn, it seemed, had grown resentful over the years watching Queen Leora hold influence over the council that he believed rightfully belonged to older, more established noble families. When he learned of her secret daughter, born quietly and hidden away, to protect the stability of Ronan's future claim to the throne, Thorn had seen an opportunity, not simply to expose the secret and destabilize the crown, but to eliminate the queen entirely, and position himself as the trusted advisor who would guide a young, grieving king through the difficult years that followed. He hired Callan Wraith, once loyal to the queen, to lure her from the palace under false pretenses on the night of her disappearance, staging her death along the northern border to avoid suspicion. When rumors began circulating recently that a girl bearing striking resemblance to the late queen had surfaced within the palace, humming a song known only to the royal family, Thorn had panicked, sending Wraith to eliminate any possible evidence of the truth before it could unravel the careful lie he had maintained for 12 years, resulting in the fire that had very nearly claimed Alira's life, along with the rest of the orphanage. Ronan set the final letter down on his desk, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years I mourned her. 12 years I trusted the man responsible for her death. 12 years he sat across from me at council meetings, offering guidance, while knowing exactly what he had taken from me. Alira reached out and placed her hand gently over his clenched fist, and slowly, his fingers relaxed beneath her touch. We have the proof now, she said softly. Tomorrow, in front of the full council, we bring this into the light, where he can no longer hide behind lies or influence. Ronan looked up at her, something fierce and determined settling into his exhausted eyes. Tomorrow, he agreed. Lord Caspian Thorn answers for everything he has taken from this family, and the truth my mother tried so desperately to protect finally sees the light it was always meant to see. The council chamber was full the next morning, every seat occupied by nobles and advisors, summoned on Ronan's direct order, their curious murmurs filling the tall stone room as they speculated about the sudden, unexplained gathering. Alira stood near the side of the chamber, dressed formally for the first time since arriving at the palace, her hands clasped tightly together to keep them from trembling, as she watched Lord Caspian Thorn take his usual seat near the front of the room, entirely unaware of what was about to unfold. Ronan entered last, moving to stand before the assembled council with the locked box and its damning letters carried carefully in his hands, his expression composed, but his eyes burning with a controlled intensity that silenced the room's murmuring almost instantly. I have called you here today, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, to reveal a truth that has been hidden from this kingdom for 12 years, a truth involving the death of my mother, Queen Leora, and the betrayal of a man many of you have trusted deeply during that time. A ripple of unease moved through the gathered nobles, and Alira watched Lord Thorn's expression carefully from her position near the wall, noting the faint tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of his posture, though he otherwise maintained his composed exterior admirably. 12 years ago, Ronan continued, we were told my mother died beyond the northern border, her death the result of unfortunate circumstance. That was a lie, constructed carefully to hide a murder, orchestrated from within this very council. Gasps rippled through the chamber, and several nobles turned to exchange stunned glances, while Lord Thorn rose slowly from his seat, his voice carefully measured despite the tension visible in his shoulders. Your Highness, forgive me, but these are grave accusations to make without clear evidence before this council. I have evidence, Ronan said, setting the small box down firmly on the table before him. Letters, written in the hand of Callan Wraith, my mother's former personal guard, detailing his role in luring her from the palace on the night of her death, at the direct instruction of a member of this very council. Thorn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though he held his composure remarkably well. And who, precisely, does this alleged evidence accuse? Ronan lifted his gaze slowly to meet Thorn's, and the silence that followed stretched taut across the entire chamber. You, Lord Thorn, he said clearly. These letters name you directly as the man who orchestrated my mother's death, and, more recently, the destruction of an orphanage, and the attempted silencing of an innocent girl who threatened to expose the truth you have spent 12 years protecting. The chamber erupted into stunned murmurs, and Thorn's carefully maintained composure finally began to crack, a flash of desperate calculation crossing his features before he forced his expression back into something resembling outrage. This is absurd, he said, his voice rising sharply. Forgery, or the desperate fabrication of a king, eager to legitimize the claims of an unproven servant girl he has inexplicably elevated to a place of honor within his court. Alira felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her at his words, and she forced herself to stand tall, despite the fear coiling tightly in her chest, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of their scrutiny. "The letters are not the only evidence," Ronan said calmly, unshaken by Thorne's accusations. "Two guards discovered your hidden correspondence, hidden behind a false panel in your private study 3 nights ago. And this morning, before this session began, Callan Wraith himself was apprehended attempting to flee the territory. He has already confessed everything, Lord Thorne, in exchange for leniency regarding his own punishment. He named you specifically, in detail, as the man who paid him to murder my mother, and later ordered him to set fire to an orphanage full of children, in an attempt to destroy any evidence connecting you to that crime." The color drained entirely from Thorne's face, and for a long, suspended moment, the chamber held its breath, waiting to see whether he would continue to deny the accusations, or whether the mask he had worn so carefully for 12 years would finally shatter beneath the weight of undeniable truth. "She was going to destroy everything I built," Thorne finally said, his voice low and bitter, the careful composure of the respected council member falling away entirely to reveal something colder and far more desperate beneath. Leora favored her own bloodline above the stability of this kingdom, hiding away a second heir who could one day challenge the succession and plunge this territory into civil conflict. "I did what was necessary to protect this kingdom from that danger." "You murdered her," Ronan said, his voice shaking now with barely restrained fury. "To protect your own position on this council, nothing more. Do not dare dress your greed in the language of duty." Guards moved swiftly at Ronan's signal, seizing Lord Thorne before he could attempt to flee, and as they led him from the chamber in restraints, the assembled nobles broke into a storm of shocked, urgent conversation, the careful order of the court shattering entirely beneath the weight of the truth that had just been exposed before them. Alira watched it all unfold with a strange, hollow feeling settling in her chest, relief and grief tangled together in equal measure, knowing that whatever justice had just been served could never fully undo the years her family had lost, nor bring back the mother she had never truly had the chance to know. Ronan turned to her once the chamber had begun to empty, his expression exhausted but lighter somehow, as though a weight he had carried for 12 long years had finally, partially, begun to lift from his shoulders. "It is done," he said quietly. "The truth is finally known." Alira crossed the room to stand beside him, and for the first time since this journey had begun, she allowed herself a small, fragile smile. "Yes," she said softly. "But I believe, my lord, there is still one truth left for us to fully understand together." In the weeks that followed Lord Thorne's arrest and eventual judgment before the full council, the palace slowly began to settle into a new, steadier rhythm, one built not on hidden fear, but on a foundation of truth finally brought into the light. Callan Wraith's full confession, combined with the letters recovered from Thorne's private study, left no doubt among the nobility regarding what had truly happened 12 years earlier. And though some among the court struggled initially to accept Alira's place within the royal family, Ronan's unwavering support, along with the undeniable evidence of the portrait and the matching royal seal, gradually silenced even the most stubborn doubts. Search parties, sent out at Ronan's order across the surrounding villages, eventually located Mother Agath alive and safe, having fled into hiding the night of the fire after Thorne's men had come searching for her, warned just in time by a kindly neighbor who had overheard their approach. She was brought back to the palace under careful guard, and when Alira embraced her for the first time in weeks, tears streaming freely down both their faces, the old woman finally revealed the full truth she had carried silently for over a decade. Queen Leora had come to her personally, Agath explained, on a desperate night 12 years ago, carrying her infant daughter and pleading for help, terrified of the danger closing in around the palace and unable to trust anyone within its walls any longer. Agath had agreed to raise the child in secret, promising to keep her identity hidden until it was safe for Leora to return and reclaim her, a promise that, tragically, the queen never lived long enough to fulfill. "I loved you as my own from that very first night," Agath told Alira, holding her hands tightly. "I only wish I could have told you the truth sooner, but I feared what might happen if the wrong ears ever learned what you truly were. You kept me safe," Alira told her gently. "That is all that has ever mattered." As for Ronan, the weeks following the trial brought a slow, careful transformation. The hardened, guarded king the court had known for 5 years gradually softening into someone who allowed himself, for the first time since his mother's disappearance, to feel something other than grief and vigilance. He and Alira spent long hours together in the evenings, sharing stories of their separate childhoods, piecing together the fragmented history of a family torn apart by betrayal but finally, slowly, being rebuilt. On a quiet evening several months after the truth had come fully into the light, Ronan found Alira sitting alone in the palace gardens, watching the sun sink low behind the distant hills, the same gardens where she had once overheard the conversation that changed everything. "May I join you?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her without waiting for an answer. "Of course," she said, smiling softly. "This is your garden after all." "Our garden," he corrected gently, and for a moment, they simply sat together in comfortable silence, watching the colors shift slowly across the evening sky. "I have been thinking," Ronan said finally, "about that first morning, when I heard you humming in the laundry hall. For 12 years, that song was the last piece of my mother I believed I would ever hold on to. I never imagined it would lead me to something far greater than a memory." Alira turned to look at him, her heart full in a way she had never known it could be, having spent so many years believing herself entirely alone in the world. "I never understood why I carried that song so deeply within me," she admitted. "I only knew it felt like comfort, like something precious I could not fully explain. Now I understand. It was never just a song. It was the thread that led me home." Ronan reached over and took her hand gently in his, the gesture no longer unfamiliar between them, but warm and steady, the simple, quiet bond of a brother and sister who had found their way back to each other against every terrible odds stacked before them. "Would you sing it?" he asked softly. "Now, together, the way it was always meant to be sung." Alira nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and together, beneath the fading colors of the evening sky, brother and sister lifted their voices in the gentle, familiar melody that had once belonged only to a mother and her son, now carried forward by two hearts who had finally, after 12 long years of hidden grief and buried truth, found their way back to the family they had never fully lost, only misplaced along the difficult road toward the light. The song drifted out across the quiet gardens, carried on the evening breeze, no longer a secret hidden in shadow, but a promise finally kept, echoing gently through the halls of a kingdom that had, at long last, learned the true cost and the true value of the truth.